Hi everyone, I'm Kai, one of the co-hosts of the Everything Cyber channel. Our channel is dedicated to upskilling ourselves and other cybersecurity professionals via technical conversations, practical labs, short videos, and much more. A quick hello to our new listeners and welcome back to our regulars for another episode of the Deep Dive Conversations, where we explore an area of cybersecurity in depth. In today's episode, we are looking back at the year 2022 from a cloud security perspective. We will be exploring some of the major developments, highlights, and vulnerabilities that shaped the cloud security world this year. And based on the lessons learned from 2022, what new trends and technologies can we expect in the coming year? To discuss all these, we have not one, but two very special guests joining us. We are delighted to have Ashish Rajan and Shilpi Bhattacharjee from the popular cloud security podcast present as guest speakers. Now, I'm personally a big fan of Ashish and Shilpi because of the amazing work they're doing for the cloud security community and a regular listener of their podcast. I'll let them give a proper intro of themselves shortly. With them, we also have our favorite co-host, Surya, who'll be bringing in knowledge from the security operations perspective. I know for sure this episode will be a fun one. So without any further ado, let's get started. Hello, welcome.
Welcome to be us over here. Nice to be here, man. Thank you for having us.
Welcome Ashish, welcome Shilpi, and hello Surya.
Hey
How are you all doing
guys.
today?
Hi, Surya.
Hi, Surya.
Ashish. Hi, Shilpi.
I've never met you before, so this is really great.
It's a good place to start, not gonna lie.
Ashish and Shilpi, thank you so much for joining us today. Ourselves as well as our audience are surely delighted to have you on board and looking forward to this. Do we want to give a very quick introduction for the very small number of people, especially in the cloud security space, who might not know you guys yet?
Yeah, I think I'll start first and I'll let Shilpi finish because she does a better job. I can ramble on from the beginning. So, as you called out, my name is Ashish Rajan. I used to be a CISO until a few months ago. I've spent 14 years in cybersecurity, with the last 7 focusing on, actually now 8, close to 8 now, focusing on cloud security. And we started Cloud Security Podcast 3.5 years ago. That was with Shilpi. And that's the cue for Shilpi to start her introduction.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shilpi. I've spent the last, 13, 14 years in risk management in various different fields, legal, financial, and cybersecurity. Ashish and I started the Cloud Security Podcast 3.5 years ago, and it was just really with an intention to share cloud security knowledge with the world. Yeah, we've loved doing it, and that's what we like sharing the passion about is cloud security.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Before we kick off the episodes, I wanted to give you the platform to make 2 quick updates. Especially, there's a special one coming from all our Melbourne audience, the Cloud Security Melbourne Meetup. Do you guys want to quickly talk about that?
Yeah, so 23rd of November, we have the Cloud Security Meetup Melbourne, which is probably the last one for the year because we're kind of towards the tail end of the year as well. We have Vineet who's coming and talk about how you can use integration of security in CI/CD pipeline using HashiCorp. You can use Terraform to build a secure CI/CD pipeline. So definitely check that out. And it is in Melbourne CBD, so it should be easily accessible. It's at WeWork. Starts at 6 p.m., finishes at 8 p.m. So if folks come in, definitely come and hang out. There are pizzas and beer as well outside of the great conversation you can hear about cloud security. So
I heard pizzas and beers. So
that was the important part.
Yes, I'll drop in a link in the description of that afterwards. And the second, I think, another one is the DevSecCon, which I'm very excited about.
Yes, so we do have DevSecOn Lightning that's happening on the 8th of December. So this is a virtual conference. It's free to attend. Anyone can register, and it actually runs 24 hours. So in America, EMEA, and in APJ. And proudly saying that one of Kaif's talk have actually been accepted for it as well. So there'll be lots of really exciting things coming up. So again, it's just something to share DevSecOps knowledge with everyone. And most of the talks are lightning talks, which is mean 15 to 20 minutes, a quick talk, giving everyone an opportunity to really share their knowledge.
Thank you so much for that, Shilpi. And again, the link and more descriptions of that will be in the description section, pun unintended. And yeah, let's get started with our episode. Before that, Surya, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's pretty good. I'm excited for your talk.
Okay, so just for the audience perspective, this will be more of a panel style conversational where we'll pick the layers of what basically happened in the year 2022 from cloud security and what that means going forward. So, team, I want to probably start on a more high level and then pick a little bit of the more specific parts. So, from a high level, 2022 has been super busy year. We have like so many new product launches. We have multiple conferences like coming back from COVID. Various things have started and whatnot, and we really saw like whole tech space accelerate, and towards the end of the year, de-accelerate as well with the whole global economy going on. So, for you, from your perspective, what were some of the biggest happenings or improvements and updates from in cloud security in 2022?
So the question was more around cloud security, what has been the pattern for the entire year so far. The beginning of the year was almost like quote unquote COVID's getting disappearing, and we're not really looking at doing as COVID is not a thing anymore. People are going to conferences. We attended some of the biggest conferences in cybersecurity. We went to RSA. One of the themes that, or maybe a few themes that came out of that conference, if you want to put cloud security into a big umbrella, and I guess the reason I say that is people talk about on-premise these days as it's the norm. I believe when most things are moved into cloud or cloud security will become similar as a norm as well. Now, the theme at RSA was API security, zero trust, and supply chain. Obviously, there are auxiliary cloud security pieces in there, but the primary theme that people wanted to know more about was around the fact was, okay, what am I doing for API security? What am I doing for supply chain? What am I doing for zero trust? Now, the reason zero trust got popular is also because of the whole, I guess, the work from home VPN, and I guess people want to go away from it. As you kind of go down that path, you kind of realize that, okay, RSA had that team. We moved on to Black Hat after that, which is the biggest cybersecurity conference for hackers. Over there, again, it was a similar theme, zero trust, supply chain, API security. We also attended the AWS Reinforce, which is their security conference, as well as Forward CloudSec, which is a cloud security conference. The theme over there that came out, which is really, well, I guess maybe not surprising, but the theme over there that was very common was the fact that now people are starting to question the security of cloud service providers. The reason for this is that a lot of the vendors have started having teams which are primarily focused on researching cloud service providers, not the customers who are using cloud service providers, but it's like the Amazons or the AWS or Azures and Google Cloud. Like, what vulnerabilities do they have? I mean, I'm finding it hard to find out how many vulnerabilities have been announced and how many can we find out more about. So I started a GitHub repository page to document every time there's a new vulnerability, because some of those vulnerabilities still require the intervention of the customer to fix it. So that was another theme that came out of those conferences. Finally, another thing that I want to point out is there were quite a few breaches as well in 2022. The two that I want to focus on is the Uber breach, as well as the phishing campaign that was going on when Queen Elizabeth passed away. Now, the Uber breach was interesting because even though they spoke about how much data was lost during the time, what they did not talk about much is the fact that the attacker also had access to the AWS console, which potentially means other production instances were going away as well. So people are focusing on data being breached, but what about all these other projects that they had, which may have just been on the AWS console? By the way, I thought it was pretty cool that the attacker went on Slack and announced that, hey, I've hacked your account. That's pretty cool how he announced it. The other one with the Queen Elizabeth one is interesting because they were asking for their Office 365 username and password in the Queen Elizabeth one. Now, for people who are from the Azure world would realize that, oh, wait, isn't that what I use for my Azure portal? It's the same thing. So if you potentially compromise your Office 365, you're potentially compromising Azure portal as well. So that was some of the themes, and I know I kind of went on for a rant, but I don't know, Shilpi, did you want to add anything in there?
No, I think you've kind of covered a majority of it, but really, it's been one of those years where we came straight out of the pandemic. 2020, early 2022 was pretty much when people started going to conferences again, and it was 2 years of this manic digital transformation, and people just kind of moved a lot of things to cloud or to different applications, and sometimes not really well. So I think it was actually really good at the beginning of the year. Everyone kind of went, we've transformed all this stuff has gone to the cloud. but have we done it securely? So when we went to RSA, I think it was very palpable because everyone was talking. We spoke to the people from Zoom because they've had this massive change, like Zoom was like popular, but like in the last 2 years, it's gone. Like we're currently on Zoom. So the adoption for Zoom has gone massively. And we spoke to the team who were doing this implementation at Zoom. And it was really interesting about how they're thinking about security and how Zoom security has become really important. So how all this rapid digital transformation, and I think the kind of transformation we've had in the last 2 years, we probably haven't had in all our lifespan. So that was really interesting. And then it's quickly shifted from that. We've had the Russia-Ukraine war. That's happened this year. Now we're dealing with, obviously the recession side of things as well. So it's just been it's one of those years where a lot of things have happened, and cybersecurity kind of has been at the core of it. So it's been very interesting from that. Like you almost have seen different years in one single year, it feels.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like 1 year. It feels like a decade.
Definitely.
Surya, would you like to add on that?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with their points. I think more than ever now, SaaS applications are being used drastically throughout organizations, and people are working from home. I myself do work from home majorly. So, this transition, it happened pretty quick. Like people did not have much time to initially set up what you could say a secure procedure or a secure operating way. And this transformation then led to the current stage where we're at, that people are reviewing their process. There are like many hybrid systems currently existing where some systems are partially legacy, you could call it as, like, which are still there, and some systems which are completely on cloud. And people are trying to manage these legacy systems with the cloud systems. Yeah, they're very interesting challenges that people are facing, and it's been a very interesting year for sure.
Interesting. So if I understood everything correctly, so on one hand, we have rapid digital transformation, on the other, the gradual adoption of the cloud. And those two together is making the whole landscape very complex. So things like all the from API security to zero trust, or these things are not necessarily directly related to the cloud, but because of their interactivity and how much they are pretty much integrated with the cloud, it is indirectly affecting the cloud as well. For example, we look at supply chain. Like when we talk about supply chain, I was looking at that the SALSA framework that the OpenSSF put out, and when I was looking through the different stages, majority of them felt like it is made for the cloud. So we are seeing that kind of wider industry adoption as well. And I think what I would do a bit more addition to it is cloud security has become much more sophisticated now, how complex everything it is. So just following something like the CIS benchmark, which used to be a very good standard to get you started, isn't sufficient anymore. There are gaps and other things that are popping up left, right, center that you wouldn't necessarily think is directly related to cloud security, right? Supply chain, again, is a common example of that. Cool. So yeah, that sets up the scene. Moving on to the next question, which I know Surya is.
Yeah, coming from an operations standpoint, 2022 has been a pretty interesting year. As you said, there have been tons of incidents, breaches, and vulnerabilities that have come out, not just in the cloud security space, but in the general space of the IT industry itself. So what incident or vulnerability that you think has been really impactful for the year of 2022?
I think maybe Shilpi should go first this time.
I think for me, I think what's really sort of captured my attention, I know there's been a lot of breaches, and when you look at a lot of the breaches, I think it's a two-part answer that I'll give. The first one is I'm still amazed by how much of it is just around the basic misconfigurations. So you still see breaches with S3 buckets on there. You still see breaches with credentials being sort of hacked or taken by the attacker. So a lot of the bigger breaches, still the core of that is lying in one of those pockets. Either someone has managed to lose their credentials one way or the other, or when you're setting up your cloud infrastructure, you've missed a part of it. You've not switched off something that is turned on by default. So a lot of them still fall in that pocket. And it's really interesting that, every time I see an S3 bucket breach, I'm like, really, like, why are we still having this? But because, as you said, Kev, quite correctly, cloud is complex. And whilst in your head you think it should be simple, when you're running a whole infrastructure, it's so easy to forget those little hygiene pieces. The second part for me was just around the security researchers. There's a lot of cloud security researchers that are really like coming up just across the board. A lot of it is driven by vendors, but to what Ashish was saying previously, it's really interesting because we're now starting to see that, not the providers are not perfect. They all have their vulnerabilities, and it's put. And we had a guest quite recently. He was a cloud security architect in one of the French companies, and he said he's actually loving the fact that all these security researchers are finding these vulnerabilities because it's shining a true light on you can't just trust, you can't just have AWS, GCP, and Azure on board and go, you know what, I've just implemented it, I'm all good. As with any system, nothing's perfect. So I think that's when I know it's not so much of a breach, but it's the fact that all the cloud service providers have their own vulnerabilities, and as a consumer of cloud, you just have to be on top of those things as well.
I'll probably add a different lens to this. I think one of the interesting hacks that I feel for the year, actually maybe two of them. One is the Uber breach, because that led to a CISO being almost convicted. I don't know the entire thing, but I didn't follow it after that. But it was really interesting to see that cybersecurity became a field where it's almost criminal that you can actually go to jail. Like, as much as we would have thought, I just make a software, people go happy or sad and move on with their life, now you potentially can be in a jail somewhere. The other one was the Okta breach for me. And I'm obviously just trying to close off the Uber thing by saying there would be repercussions that would come out of this. That would be really interesting to see how in 2023 and beyond people react to it and what changes come from it, and how many CISOs are going to tell their board, well, I'm going to wash my hands off this. You should take this responsibility because I don't want to go to jail. So, or maybe even how many breaches would be announced because people would just panic and just want to share everything just in case. I'd rather have a company breach announced or instead of going to a jail. So the balance would be hard to find. Yeah. The other one that I find was interesting was the Okta breach that happened as well, which I thought was really fascinating because for folks to know about it, it was more on the call center that was linked to Okta, not Okta themselves. But it was so, I guess the detection capability of Okta was so sophisticated when they realized that someone from the call center was doing something that they should not have, they immediately shut that down. I don't know how many people have that kind of capability, but in the context of supply chain, I think people should definitely start putting more attention onto identity that they provide for third party, because that would be the key for knowing what they're doing and what they're acting on. So I don't know how many people are walking towards that path. A lot of people, to what you mentioned earlier, Kev, salsa framework is what people are focusing on. It's great. But if you think about what we have already done in terms of how wide the Pandora box is open for supply chain, like I nowadays would give, I don't want to throw Atlassian under the bus, but I think if I have, some kind of a Jira integration, it requires access keys or something of a role or whatever. And how am I using that as a way to monitor, hey, has Jira been compromised? I don't know, because AWS got compromised. Amazon employee got into Capital One. That was a breach as well. Yeah. So how do I make sure I can have detection capabilities for this? So these two for me are going to be the highlights for the year, and what people do with this in 2023 would be really fascinating.
Yeah, I'll take you that supply chain vulnerability forward because I think that's been the highlight for me. Although I know that supply chain has been the buzzword of the year to some extent, like say as bomb 3 times and a genie grants your wish. It's been like that. But I suppose all those buzzwords usually have some substance behind them, and for me at least, I see dependency confusion, I see all kinds of different package poisoning type of attacks, and that's a new sort of vector that we didn't used to think about, right? So when we think of open source, like fast forward a year or two, open source was the equivalent of trust. Open source meant like this is something people should be using. But when we hear open source now, that someone's corporate software is dependent on an open source, that's like people are like, oh, what else is in there? So that shift has been very interesting for me, and I think some of the breaches have been quite ingenious as well. For example, this CTX Python package that got So
PyPy.
it's for the PyPy package. So if for people that don't know, it was a very popular Python package. It used to be used by a lot of people, but the developer was inactive for quite a bit of years. But suddenly we see a new update. We're like, hooray! So someone has taken charge of it, and everyone downloads it, right? So what basically turns out was the email that the developer, or the domain the developer registered with, basically it was expired. So that hacker got that and then register for themselves, and they had complete access over that package. And that was like obviously from a technical perspective, didn't take any complexity, but from just how easy it was and how many people were affected, that's like a major win for the attacker, right? If I remember, 3 million or something people affected and had their AWS secrets stolen. And that wasn't a one-off case. Those kind of attacks were like the common trend throughout the year, like one after another. So those kind of attacks, I think, was if I had to say, the defining type of attacks for 2022. I would put that along with MFA fatigue right up there.
Yeah,
Did you
absolutely.
guys hear about Protestware?
Do you want to give us more?
Yeah, sure. Well, I don't know if Shilpi wants to talk about it, but I think Shilpi kind of hinted towards it by talking about the Ukraine-Russia war thing. So the open source libraries that you're referring to as well, quite a few open source libraries are maintained by Ukraine developers as well. And as part of their protest for what Russia is doing, some of these open source maintainers who are Ukrainian developers, they decided to basically put bugs into their dependencies.
Flip the
And
switch.
yeah, and then everyone, and as a sign to say that, hey, you should do something about this because we are upset about the fact that what Russia is doing. Yeah, so that basically Protestware is using existing a library or I guess functionality or application as a way to protest against a cause. Massive scale of, because of some of these libraries are really popular, and you're protesting, but you're like, well, I don't appreciate you're upset, but you don't have to ruin my business for it. So that's kind of the rise that also happened in 2022.
Yeah, it's a good way to get attention, right? And it's, in a way, you can say non-violent, but yeah, that's something that's happening quite a bit as well.
I wonder if they would make that criminal.
Yeah. I mean, it's non-violent unless you join that team sprint.
That's right, yeah.
I don't know how
I
feel
about the metro as well.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, do you have anything else to add on this?
No, I think the main point, other than the supply chain and the protests, where identity in general has been a big talking point, not just in cloud security, but in security as a whole. You've seen, as you mentioned, the MFA fatigue. That's been very commonly used to bypass MFA, just spam on MFA calls, and like at some point, that guy's like, just accept, to stop these alerts. Or in other cases, you see like attackers like lapses just purchasing credentials and using that as an initial vector to get into a system and then perform certain compromises within that. So identity as a whole has been a very important topic. And then a topic that kind of ties into that is privileges. So using the least privilege has been a very big thing recently. So people are starting to implement PIM more often and other security solutions along the way to enhance their identity management solutions.
You want to quickly mention what's PIM for the audience?
Yeah, sure. PIM is basically privileged identity management. In terms, basically what you can do is that, for example, you're a regular user and for some time you want to become a contributor in Azure, you could just PIM into that role and it'll give you via either a procedure that you have, like a ticketing procedure, like, hey, I raised this request, gets approved, and then you're allowed that access, or it could be a direct access for like a certain duration. So you're basically only elevated for the time that you need that access, and then you go back to being a regular user. So in that sense, it reduces like your attack coverage that you have.
Yes.
Does that require like a E5 license? Sorry, don't cut you off. I was just curious. Does that require like an E5 license?
Man, I can't remember on top of my head, to be honest.
I feel like it's an expensive feature. It doesn't sound like a feature would be just, hey, just turn it on. No, the reason I mentioned that is because
it needs P2. I think it needs Azure AD P1 or P2, if I remember correctly.
All right. Because the reason I say that is because a lot of SaaS providers charge you extra for putting MFA. And I wonder how many would charge extra for privileged access management as well. Yeah. Like, well, because you want security, you should pay extra for it instead of making a default.
Yeah, I know a lot
So
of
we had this big conversation. Sorry, I'll quickly finish.
yeah,
We had this big conversation on SSO when
yeah,
you know how everyone has SSO as a premium feature, but
Yeah, there shouldn't be. I mean, although I can appreciate as a business you put some money into it and you spend some it's a feature you're building. But at what point do you feel like it should not just be a part of the product? Like, it's like saying if you have a door, it's locking is a feature, but you can't put a key in there. Just a door
yeah,
which you can open and close. But I don't want to give you a key. Like, what's the point? So do
exactly.
I pay extra for the door lock?
yeah.
Surya, did I talk over you when you were
No,
saying?
that was pretty much my point. I was gonna pretty much raise SSO as you went ahead, because I was like,
Okay.
for sure, other than MFA and other stuff, SSO and how it's been like, you have gateways that you have to pass through, so then you can get access. So it's like become a pay subscription fee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know why we, maybe I wonder if it's also because a lot of people, that's why they didn't go down the path of security. Because for them, it's like, well, why am I paying extra for this? Doesn't make sense. I'll just tell Surya to be more careful when he types in his password.
It's definitely a barrier when you add cost to something, cost or time, it becomes a barrier for security.
Yeah, it also goes against like one of the newer principles that probably came around the recent years with modern identity is like have one strong password rather than having multiple passwords stored across different places. So it's easier to manage and protect against.
Another funny thing is I spent my first 3 years in cybersecurity and identity access management, and I thought it was the shittiest job on the planet. Not because the company was bad, but because I thought there is no future in identity. And now, after so many years, identity has become the most important thing. I'm like, oh my god, thank God I was doing identity back then.
The right place at the right time.
I absolutely like. I think these concepts are so much easier. But back when I was doing it, like 8, 9 years ago, like, oh my god, why would people do privileged access management? Why can't I just put MFA and move on? But yeah, I definitely appreciate him of that fact now.
Moving the conversation forward, we have been talking about this in a more generalistic perspective anyways, but I want to sort of up it a bit one notch and dive a bit more into the trends. So if you were to say in a few words that these are the trends you saw in cloud, not just cloud security, then what would those be?
General trends in cloud security across the board, or
Across
just
the board.
okay? So from a security perspective, or in general?
In general or security, whatever you choose to.
So I think the first general one you would see, I think, is a mix of Kubernetes getting a lot more popularity across the board. I think they were saying it's increased the adoption for it has increased quite a bit.
Yep.
And also for the HCL or HashiCorp command line language. The reason I mentioned those two is because I believe as an industry, we're moving. Like last year was all talking about we should do IAC everywhere. We should do cloud security, misconfiguration. Like a lot of people have heard that, and a lot of people started projects around it. And as you kind of move to the next part, there would be a lot of now. What's the next challenge after that? Is what people are going to talk about because looking at the adoption curve. If you go through the GitHub trends that came through, Terraform usage is through the roof. A lot of people are using it quite a bit for IAC, which means if you're using IAC, most likely you're doing a lot of automation already. The other one being, as you kind of go down the path of automation, you also use a CSPM or a CNAP these days. You are already basically maybe not doing misconfiguration as much. So what is that bigger detection piece that you would work on in the cloud context? Or would we focus more on application security? Because that kind of has never been a problem that went away. It's always been there. And as much as you can automate your AWS, you can have automated detection. If your application itself is vulnerable, it basically doesn't really make a difference. So what are you going to do about that? The third one, which I mentioned earlier, is the Kubernetes part, where cloud native, because a lot of people have gone down the multi-cloud path, a lot of people are adopting Kubernetes as well because they're going to that scale where EC2 instances or your virtual machines no longer serve the purpose for some of the newer builds that they're working on. And sometimes they can be quite expensive as well. So I believe that there would be a way where a lot of people would either go towards like serverless, maybe making a comeback, but not as big as it was before. Maybe still for backend, but Kubernetes, I think, is definitely going to be the shining star in this.
Shilpi?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that as well. So like Kubernetes security, I think because with the adoption of Kubernetes, Kubernetes security is gonna be something that's gonna become more popular because obviously once you implement something, you've got to make sure that it's secure. So there's a lot of focus around that. API security is one that I think we can't ignore because at the beginning of the year, I remember when we were at RSA, there were a few people talking about API security, and we were like, why is this coming up? Is this important? And I think if we now come, the full year on, there's been so many things that have happened. Obviously, there've been some really prominent breaches that have happened now around API security as well. So I definitely feel API security will be one that we'll be seeing a lot more in 2023. And again, with the adoption of cloud and digital transformation, API, the adoption of API has just increased so much. There's so many more integrations. So that's definitely something that I think is another trend. Another one is, I think I'm going to say SBOM the fourth time on this call. I think maybe I'm hoping the genie does appear. Stuff around, like, I think a lot of vendors as well and companies are trying to actually solve the whole SBOM thing because in theory, it is something that is very powerful. We do need to know what's going in our software. So a lot of companies are doing a lot of work around how do we make it meaningful. So I think the last couple of years has been, oh, we need SBOM. Everyone's giving each other lists. But I think now lately, at least towards this half of the year, the conversations have been around what are we meaningfully doing with SBOMs? Like, how are we using it? It was really interesting, actually. I was part of a conversation with the chief trust officer of Atlassian, actually. And he said, as a consumer and a distributor of software, what is it that you need to do with SBOMs? Like, most organizations are still just probably collecting it and just keeping it for a rainy day. If I get breached, I'm going to turn to this. I think there's going to be some maturity in that space as well that's going to come through.
Yeah, I have a point outside the general cloud security space, if you want to put it as, like, other than the regular topics. I think one other point that I've noticed happening with all the recent breaches going on is a change in the regulatory process. There are more fines, that being more hefty. Basically, it's not going to be just a slap in the wrist, but actually targeting your profits or what turnover you had for the year. There's also been stricter compliance coming around data security in general. And I think all of these changes will slowly start affecting cloud and will affect cloud in general for sure.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so to understand, we had Kubernetes, we have then acceleration of IAC, infrastructure as code. We had then Shilpi mentioned SBOM, and then Surya, you mentioned that the regulatory changes that will affect the whole wider ecosystem. Yeah, that makes sense. I suppose, yeah, if I had to mention something, it is along the same lines. For me, I think it's more because the work I do, infrastructure as code, has been the biggest sort of blessing or trend, at least I've noticed, partly because I saw firsthand how infrastructure and code or anything XYZ as code can really help so much in, I'm going to use quite a few buzzwords here, so heads up. So secure by default, and you putting security, shifting security as left as possible. So for example, in Atlassian, we rolled out things like dedicated microservices or sidecars for authentication authorization, things like golden images and golden base images and those kind of things. Compliance as code. That's something we've been doing for a while. And I saw all of those things piecing together and how they can make us build software in a secure way. That's been that. And I was seeing some report from Sneak and on how infrastructure as code adoption has been gradually going up. I mean, I think the biggest implementation of cloud still comes as container space. That's where we see the most improvements, but ISC is certainly that's picking up pace, and for good reasons too. Because in that same report, it was mentioned that maybe 67 or something % of people choose cloud because of the deployment speed. And if you think of what are the biggest pain points ISCs resolve is that deployment speed. So that does completes the picture. So yeah, that's been the main highlight for me, I suppose, the trend I've seen. when I speak with my friends at Canva, Google, or in other places, they're almost on the same tangent. Yes, that wraps up the trend section. The buzzword bingo is, and now Surya, on with the next question.
I have a pretty interesting one coming. This might be a hot one. What's been your favorite new technology or tool that you have used or you've really enjoyed in 2022?
Which apparently doesn't do a great job. But
Others specifically in cloud.
oh, fair. Oh, fair. I was like, so you think my $4,000 camera is not worth the mention? From a cloud perspective, I'll focus on the AWS one because there's a AWS, like one of the biggest AWS conferences coming up, and a couple of features we spoke about that. We run a Ask Me Anything office hour thing every once a week on LinkedIn audio, and it kind of came out of from there based on the conversation we were talking about there from what would be the trend for AWS reinvent. They came out with a couple of things. One was to be able to search assets which are across your AWS account, which has never been done before. And earlier, I would have to write like some kind of a script to figure out what my assets are in my AWS account. And that inventory thing was not there. I think Azure GCP has a better way of dealing with it, but AWS did not. So that was really interesting for me to figure out because the by that extension, the question that people have from a security perspective is, hey, I walk in and the first day, what are my public facing DNS IPs or DNS addresses that I need to worry about? It was a really hard question to answer because if you have, I don't know, over 1,000 DNSs, CNAMEs, you're trying to run, which one is public, which one needs to be public, which doesn't need to be public. So I think that would be an easier conversation, and the inventory management in general would be easier conversation from an audit perspective as well, and from ongoing operation management. The other one that I thought was really interesting was around the fact of EFS. I think it was EFS, one of those services that they allow for your security hub and stuff is basically being extended to more regions. But the idea, what was it? I think I need to look it up. It was a really interesting one that I came across. Like, that's gonna be a game changer. I'm gonna do this magic trick of bringing something up really quickly. EventBridge. EventBridge is basically for people who know about event-driven architecture. The idea behind, hey, you can trigger an event and then something happens. Basically, that is getting further integrated, and that would be across all your accounts under organization, which means for people who may not be from an AWS world, for Azure and GCP context, in a AWS world, there's like a master or I don't use the master slave, but there's like an top account, which is where your organization is. And underneath that, you normally had to create an event bridge for each one of those accounts and map them together. But now you can have all of it together under one organization. So for context, your entire AWS environment can be event driven. That's the potential here. So those two are my interesting and favorite things I want to try work out for the rest of the year.
Serverless makes a comeback, hopefully.
Hopefully.
From my perspective, I think I'm really interested. I think I'm going to take a leaf off you, Kaif, in the whole infrastructure as code, but also how do we integrate the cloud security side of things into the development cycle? I think in most of the keynotes that we've heard in the big conferences this year, everyone's been talking about that we need to sort of bake security into the infrastructure and do it from the beginning. And I think that is such a powerful thing. And I think it will not be something that we'll get to in 2023. But I can see overall everyone's working towards that because there's been such a focus on just finding vulnerabilities. And as you said, a lot of fatigue around this is your problem, you haven't done this correctly. And that's not moving anyone ahead. It's causing a lot of stress to, the developers as well. So it's really interesting. And I know a lot of the companies are working across this. So I wouldn't name specific tools because I don't want to pick favorites, but a lot of work is going into this interesting work about how do we make it seamless? How do we bake it in from the beginning, that infrastructure is code, but also keep the speed? And it'll be really interesting to see next year or the next few years how people actually sort of solve that issue, whereas security just became something that very innate rather than just something that scares you with pop-ups and tells you that this is missing and that's wrong. So there is some great work being done in that space, but I would love to see where that goes in the next few years.
Do you want to continue the trend and give a non-cloud favorite tech of 2022?
Me? Oh, non-cloud favorite tech. I think I'm still a big fan of the smartphone, right? Like I'm just amazed at how much, like, look at it. Ashish's camera is like better than a $4,000. So I think I'm a fan of anything that is MVP. So like a small bit of technology. Like we use the Rode mics for our recording, and it's just such a small mic. So I think any technology that fits into the palm of your hand but does deliver great results. I think we've got a lot of that happening. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
I've started using the new AirPods, and I'm loving them because it does noise cancellation so perfectly. So yeah, lots of good tech happening. So it'd be good to see the similar kind of things in the cloud, I guess.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if you've seen in Ventura that you can put your phone behind your laptop, and then you can use your phone's camera directly as your laptop's
Yep.
camera to do all kinds of audio thing. And you just no wiring, nothing needed. You just put it in, and it has that auto integration thing. I'm quite excited for that because that saves me. And suppose my cameras now is pretty basic. It's like my laptop camera for now. But yeah, like compare that with my phone's back camera, that's like miles ahead, right? So if I can record in that, it's like a game changer for me.
Wait,
so
is that already
that's that.
Yeah,
It's in format.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, so by Apple?
Apple, yeah. I mean, it's just uniquely to Apple. So suss that
Really?
out. That's
Yes.
yeah. So you just put your camera, pop it back, and then I think now there's Logitech or someone already made a device to attach your camera, and it's pretty neat. Pretty neat. I forgot what they are calling it, the official term, but I saw it in that Apple that very flashy Apple event they do every year.
WWDC. Oh no.
What is it called?
WWDC.
Sorry?
I'm not sure if it's the conference one. I think it was the other one. The one where they reveal the iPhone and stuff, but yeah.
Oh,
I
right.
think just using iPhone as your laptop camera, Mac Ventura. Coming up with search terms from the.
I was just gonna say, if someone actually listens to this part of the interview, they'll all think we've got Apple shares.
Yeah.
I do actually.
I do too. So, but okay. Moving forward with that, I suppose the favorite tool I loved in cloud this year, and this is just purely from a user perspective, just no affiliation whatsoever. For me, has been Sneak. As is my favorite tool definitely this year. I work in our product security incident response program as well as our general AppSec, and I've just used Sneak so many times during vulnerability investigations, and it was just so useful. And overall, in their typical SDLC lifecycle, right? So it's been quite useful for us. For example, in the recent OpenSSL vulnerability, we relied on Sneak to detect vulnerable containers that has OpenSSL installed, right? If Sneak wasn't there, if we didn't have that rolled out, we'd have to do extra legwork. It's still possible, but we'd have to do much extra legwork to find that out versus just looking at our dashboard. So Sneak's been quite successful for us. Again, no affiliations, at least until now. So we have rolled out Sneak containers, Sneak SCA at Atlassian, and we are working on rolling out the SaaS side of it. So quite excited about that and how that's going to look. Look, obviously, like any other tool, it has its challenges. It's going to be there, but I feel you'll have challenges with every tool out there, and it's about fine tuning it and getting it to the optimized stage so your company or your organization can use it. And for us, Sneak has gradually been going to that stage. Apart from that, again, in the same space, I personally have utilized SemGrep a lot, and we have some plans on secure coding guidelines and developments and how we will integrate it using SemGrep. So that's coming on pretty soon for us. So those things have been absolutely fantastic for us to work with. I enjoyed and learned a lot. So that's been highlight for me. Non-cloud will probably be Canva. Like I've just used Canva so much this year. It's powered by the cloud, so I suppose it's still there. So it's been for me that's the favorite.
Yeah, mine's going to be a bit different again because coming from an operations standpoint, I've really enjoyed Cribble. It's a data pipelining tool within the security operations space. You get tons of logs, but some of the logs that you get, you probably do not need all of the rows, all of the columns that are within the data sets, and you can fine tune and enrich your data like before it gets ingested into your SIEM. So Cribble has been a super interesting tool with that. Their data ingestion pipeline makes it very easy to like manage your data streams that are coming through. So you get all the big chunks of data coming through, and then you can like filter them out, like make sure they're transformed into the required state, and then push it into your SIEM. So they made that process very seamless and very fast. Like I think Azure Sentinel takes a good chunk of time to ingest your data. So there's like a 5-minute delay, if I remember correctly. But with using Cribble, your ingestion time delay is like literally a minute. Like the drop is like massive. And it's been pretty shocking, yeah, in comparison to just using, the built-in integration connectors. So yeah, and it's been a lot of fun. There's a great potential in that tool, I see. Following on with all the non-tech stuff, I think I've been really enjoying my Apple Watch. A bit basic. I used to be a Pebble kid, but here I'm with an Apple Watch now.
You've completed the
Wow.
loop. We mentioned every Apple product.
Yeah. Apple should sponsor this episode. Is Cribble available for Splunk as well? Is it a Splunk alternative?
It was started by the VP
Oh, I
of
see
Splunk.
it's a Cribble lawsuit.
Yes, there is. Unfortunately, that's the challenges. Yes, that hopefully that gets sorted out. Fingers crossed. But
Yeah.
it's a very interesting tool that was started by the ex-VP of Splunk.
Interesting. Yeah.
And yeah, I think the main customers are Splunk.
Makes sense. Because it sounded a bit like Splunk, but some of the things Splunk was
I
doing.
think so. Splunk, the thing is that most of the stuff you directly ingest. So you have like your forwarders set up to ingest the data and that you later index. But with Cribble, you have the whole ingestion pipeline that you can manage better.
Looking at the time, we'll maybe do an episode on Cribble versus Splunk. But let's wrap this up. We have I think, max 5 to 8 more minutes. So we've talked a lot about 2022. So let's shift the focus to the next year, 2023. So guys, what are your sort of predictions going forward in cloud security? And you can be as wild as possible, like Brazil wins the World Cup or whatever.
I would say it would be if ideally, I would love it if security becomes a default for most of the cloud service providers. It's not a feature that you like. It's not the door example that I used earlier. I get the door, but without the lock. It's a pointless door. So I would love it if they can enable security features by default. That would be ideal, but I'm pretty sure they won't do it. A more realistic opinion would be if they are, I guess, from a capability perspective, most cloud service providers at the moment are quite split from a security perspective. Like if you look at what Amazon can do or what Google Cloud can do or what Azure can do, they're quite split in terms of, if you want, say, threat intelligence is part of it that can be done in AWS, but it's done really well in GCP, but I don't use GCP for anything else. So I can't I feel like if there could be some kind of a security leveler, for lack of a better word, it levels the playing field across the board, because it should be. We're still using the same kind of resources, but I think that would be a really good prediction for my part. If they can release something which would be from an, I understand there would be gaps. I understand there would be gaps from a vulnerability management perspective, open source, and all of that. Yes, there's a lot of work that required to go down that path, but making security defaults of just as simple as encryption should be there by default, and the other one just being the fact that they can introduce security tools which enable the whole IAC thing we've been talking about, enable API security thing we've been talking about, just visibility of it. Because I'm kind of sick and tired of looking at a lot of the conversation just focusing around, I want visibility around what I have in my AWS account or what I have in my Azure account or GCP account. Yeah. Visibility should not have been the problem. It should have been a lot more deeper, but here we are stuck with visibility. So those are my 3 things for next year.
I think I would go back to the SBOM thing. So I think definitely I think there will be some interesting stuff coming out in the SBOM space. I think every company out there realizes that there's a huge potential there because it's mandated. So I think it'll only be silly for companies not to sort of go down that path. I think another thing I'm seeing is a lot of maturity in just the security programs within companies. So because I think next year is going to be one of those years where companies will have less resources. just with, as they're expecting with the recession and things. I think it's going to force companies to get much more creative about how they do security with fewer resources. So that would be really interesting as to how they drive that. So I think there'll be some interesting things. As they always say, in tough times, good things sometimes come out. So I'm expecting that some of that will also happen. There will be so like Google Cloud's trying to do a lot of stuff where they're allowing AWS and Azure stuff to happen within security. So I would assume that AWS and Azure would go down that path as well. So a lot of cross-pollination and multi-cloud solutions that are cloud native probably would come out, I think.
Yeah, I'll absolutely agree with the cross-pollination that's happening. I see that trend happening for sure, and possibly continuing for the next few years. Other than that, container security that's probably pretty high on the list. As mentioned earlier, like the workloads have increased drastically. Maybe a hint that serverless could also make a comeback, and some sort of possibly, future predictions, maybe serverless makes a small comeback, because as it's the next step, after containers, the next step is moving towards serverless, or fast architectures, as you could say, and that makes the best use of cloud if you think about it. And I think more breaches in general,
Are you hoping for more breaches?
I am not hoping for more breaches, but in general, it's just to be expected. There'll be points where you'll suddenly have spikes or some vulnerability that comes out, like Log4j. Everyone is like, oh my god, I need to patch everything now. There's certain vulnerabilities that can come out that can have a widespread impact, or possibly vulnerabilities that have not been patched for 2 years and then suddenly start getting exploited. So it's one of those two that's probably going to happen.
Yeah,
and
it's still out there.
yeah,
Also.
and the last part I want to just mention is that a bit more focus on identity, a bit more focus on everyone starting to control their identity a bit further and starting to manage, because it's not just users. If you think about it, applications, service accounts, there's so many different parts where identity is being used, and there'll surely be a tighter hold on that.
Yes. So just to quickly sum up, so from Ashish, I heard sort of like a normalization. If some sort of normalization standard or tool that comes up and helps the do that feature parity between different providers, and then on your wish list there was more accessibility to security features that are now paywalled. What was the third one? There was a third one.
We spoke about cybersecurity, balance, visibility.
Visibility, yes. Cool. And then from Shilpi, from your side, you had SBOM, and then moving on from, what was S-bomb? I'll edit this part out. Remember, I'm not be struggling.
I was saying like maturity and like security programs and security.
Yes, so the resource constraints, so we'll see a lot of creativity. Surya agreed on that. So Surya had container security, and then
identity.
Identity
was
and maybe
you should have a pen and paper, man. Just write it down next time.
No, well, yeah, I had a 7 a.m. flight.
Oh, well, fair enough. No, I'm just kidding anyway.
No. I mean, no, all good. No, I should write down next time. No, I was expecting like one per person, and then everyone was like 3 each, and I'm like, oh,
you're all overachievers, Kev. Underestimate us.
I suppose, like for me, it will be the same thing. Tying to what Shilpi said and the industry pattern, ISC is something I'll see, or XYZ as a code, because now we have that resource constraint going forward, and that I think we're gonna have more and more of the as code for the automation and speed it brings. One very last question to wrap us up: what new technology or cloud security, specific to cloud security, are you going to learn in 2022? And you need to say one this time.
What was the question again?
What new technology or tool will you be learning, or you recommend others learning in the coming year?
I definitely would say Kubernetes.
Kubernetes?
Yeah, I was going to say the same too.
Okay, Shilpi?
I don't know whether this is a tool or a technology, but I think people really need to understand open source, like what they're putting in their, in their software, what's being done about it, because I think most organizations use like a lot of open source, and I think I feel it's one of those like ticking time bombs in everyone's organization. So the more I learn about it, the more I kind of go like, so I know that's something that I definitely want to look more into, like what are people using, what's being done about it. So I know you mentioned KF Open SSF before, and I know they've got a project happening where they're actually picking the top 10 top most used open source software, and they're doing a review of them to see how secure they are, who's maintaining them, all of that. So I think that's definitely going to be something that's going to have more light on it. So I know it's not really a tool, but I think it's just one of those things that we really need to
No, I think that's definitely one important aspect given everything going on. And to summarize the other two, let me Google Kubernetes courses on Udemy very quickly. It's
I
like
probably
my
would
next
not go
move.
for the Udemy courses. It's just, I think in general, because there's a lot of free resources on YouTube as well. I think there's a lady, Nana, I think her name is. There's another person from Singapore. Like both of them have done a lot of courses in Kubernetes. So I'll probably go for more of those rather than Udemy per se.
What's it, Nana? Nana
Yeah.
Kubernetes.
Tech with Nana.
Okay.
Yeah. Tech with Nana. Yeah, she's done she's done Kubernetes 0 to hero kind of a thing as well.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to put the links of those in the chat.
Yeah.
In the chat description.
I can't remember
Maybe
mine.
cut out definitely not Udemy because you don't want Udemy coming after you. Ashish.
Yeah.
They're definitely not sponsoring this video.
Oh no. Okay, thank you so much, guys. It was super fun learning all those cloud security things that have happened this year, and might happen next year. And as you can see, my battery is low at this point. I haven't had breakfast yet. So if people want more of you, which I know they might, Ashish and Shilpi, where can they go?
Shilpi, you go first.
Should I say it? So I think pretty much if you type cloud security podcast, we should come up on any platform. So we're on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, everywhere else, I think. So yeah, just shout cloud security podcast. We're both active on most of the social or would be able to respond to you. I would just say if anyone wants to get into cloud security or wants to learn anything about cloud security, we usually try and make time for most people.
And you can find us on audio platforms as well, like Spotify, Apple Podcasts as well. But I'm grateful that I'm at one of those places in my life where if you just Google my name, you'll find me. So I'm going to use that to Google me and find me. Yeah, you might see pictures of me without a beard, which I'm still trying to get rid of. But I think 2 years of photos are not enough. I need to put more photos, cover up for the rest, earlier 10 years before that. Yeah, I think that's where you can find us. But I just wanted to mention, I don't know if you folks have seen, we started a project called Cloud Security Villains, which we're going to release as actually end of this month, I think. So it'll be really interesting. We're really excited about that, and kind of is aligned with the cloud security train that she'll be talking about. So exclusive stuff coming in, never seen in the cloud security. Actually, I don't think this was done in the cloud security or cybersecurity space. So
they just dropped the second teaser, so that's just something people can go check.
Oh yeah, people see on the YouTube channel. The cloud security villains have come in, but the story is still incomplete. It's going to be complete on 22nd of November. So just to keep an eye out on the YouTube channel, and you'll find out on social media. Yeah, thank you for having us. So really appreciate it.
You've got me hooked. I'm gonna check that out very soon.
Yeah.
But Ashish, Shilpi, thank you so much, and thank you to you, Surya, as well, for all of your insightful knowledge. I really hope this was very useful, and thank you so much to our audience, whoever decides to listen to us as well. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.